Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everybody, for another episode of Lands of Legends Grim. This time we're looking at the encounters. If you missed what I streamed yesterday, you can check it out wherever my fine streams are sold, or I guess in this case, given away. I looked at the first half of the product, which was Grim Areas. This time, we're looking at the encounters. So if you were to go, I think a link is in the show notes. If you were to go to drive through, there's one product. It's called Lands of Legends Grim. When you if you buy it, you will find that it actually is two PDFs. First one, which is the file is called Front. I'm not sure what they call it. I think they call it Front and Back. Probably would rename those just to make more sense. I was definitely a little bit confused by what they meant when we first saw that. But it's two things. So the first one, which we did in the stream before, was a whole bunch of tables about randomly choosing all these kind of crazy, interesting places. They were all 1d10 rolls, and they had them for all kinds of different terrains. Now we're looking at the other counterpart, encounters. I think I need to come out of full screen mode because this one, the best way to view it is, oops, there we go, is where I can do where I get to both pages at the same time, because that's kind of how the layout is. And looking at it just one page at a time doesn't really. The design just doesn't work well because you have graphics and things that kind of go across both pages. Like this one here, Grim Civilizations. So they had a similar civilizations chart in the table in the first one. The one thing I thought about these was they didn't really seem to me civilizations. I'm not sure why they call it civilizations, because they didn't really seem to. I didn't feel like that they presented whole, I don't know, cultures and traditions and everything. And maybe that's too much to ask when you only have a paragraph to work with, but we do get another table. I'm probably gonna read maybe two. I'm not going to read through every single one of these. I'm just going to read a selection. I'm thinking two per table. I'm just going to pick some. And of course, if you're in the chat and you have one you think that speaks to you, or the, hey, thing's cool, go ahead and read it. Let me just, we got some comments in the chat already. Will there be sand golems? The tension is killing me. I'm not sure. I'd like to think that it would be interesting, right? If some of these things we're getting encounters matches up with the things they came up with in the areas. So maybe we will get sand golems. I really like the sand golem concept. So yeah, my fingers crossed as well. Fluffy the Griffin says, oh heck, I forgot about having this open. Scared me half to death. I think that's happened to you before, Fluffy the Griffin, or it's happened to somebody else. I am happy to scare people, keep them awake, get those juices flowing. So let's just pick a couple of these civilizations at random. Maybe I should roll. I should have a D10 die. I can just roll to do this for me. That might be an interesting way to do it next time. I'll get some dice out. But for now, I'll just pick the first one, Cruella's Freak Show. This traveling band with 3 horse wagons includes a 3-legged goblin juggler, a team of 4 doppelganger acrobats, a quote-unquote tamed wereboar, Elcher the Fire Eater and Sword Swallower Elf. I should have Elcher the Fire Eater and Sword Swallower Elf. And Cruella herself, the obese, bearded, 7-foot-tall lady of the show. Cruella is always looking for bizarre creatures, sentient or otherwise, to improve her show. So this is kind of an encounter, right? They call it a civilization, or this table civilizations. That's not a civilization, but it is cool. It reminds me of in The Last Unicorn, and forgive me, I've never read the book, or at least I haven't read it yet, but in the movie, there was, I forget her name, but she was voiced by Angela Lansbury, and she was basically this traveling, what was it? Just carnival of oddities, not even a carnival, just sort of a sideshow. And it was kind of a fun element in the movie if you haven't seen it, because there were most of the animals where she was using illusions to essentially make them seem like mythical animals, but she had 2 that were real, or she had 1, and then she found the unicorn, realized she was a real unicorn, because most people would just see them as horses, see her as a horse, This lady, I think it was Madame Fortuna or something, I think maybe it had been her name, saw her, oh, you're a real unicorn, managed to capture her. And so she had the unicorn that was real, and then I believe it was a harpy that was also real. And that's what it makes me think of. And if the show had there was a nice bit there with Schmendrick, the magician, who ends up helping the unicorn escape somewhat, and then the sad end to Madame Fortuna once the harpy gets out. Roman lives. Terrence says, "Mommy Fortuna." There you go. I knew it was something like that. Okay, let's pick another one. Vivisectors. The local academy is looking for living subjects for experiments in vivisection. The heroes might respond to an appealing notice to, quote-unquote, provide some experimental animals without realizing that they are, in fact, the intended subjects. Is that to mean that the party are the intended subjects or the animals? Not sure. So this is almost more of a plot hook with a twist. But it's not bad. It's just weird. I just can't get over why are they calling them civilizations. I don't know. And then one more just for kicks. The Angel of Death. A vengeful god has decided to send his Angel of Death to this city to punish its citizens of their sins. The curse is proclaimed with great lamentations by prophets and preachers. By dawn, all the firstborn will be slain. Children, adults, and elder people, including the characters, are firstborn. Once proclaimed, the curse won't be avoided, but some priests may know of a ritual to save a few houses or a way to appease the god. This is also a cool adventure hook. If you happen to be in this place and this curse was laid on you, obviously, if you want it to be more than a short adventure, potentially give them more time. But it also makes for a cool moment if you just have this one night that you have to figure out how to get through this curse, and you can't just run away because the curse is just going to follow you. All right, let's see what else we got. These are okay. So they are doing it by terrain again, but I think the order is different. I could have sworn that deserts was not the first terrain that we got before. But I do like that these are lining up. Let's see here. Which one sounds good? Let's do Vulture Demon. This is number 9 on the table. This horrid 7-hit die bird with 3 green luminescent eyes has just spotted the party. It follows them through the desert, never getting close enough to be engaged in melee combat, and unless forced to flee or turned away by a cleric at night, at night, it will shriek to call all possible monsters to the party. It waits for someone to die and then feeds on their soul. No resurrection spell will work unless the demon bird is found or somehow summoned and killed. After eating one soul, it leaves. So that's pretty intriguing. Some interesting notes here. It says turned away by a cleric. Presumably that would mean turn undead, but it's not actually undead. So that's, unless we are saying it is undead. I mean, here there's a picture of what could be that Vulture Demon, but there it looks clearly like some kind of skeletal undead bird. But the text doesn't mention that it is undead. I like that it was going to shriek and call out other monsters to the party. That's definitely a nice twist, and we've seen this kind of stuff in nature. I watched a nature show where they talked about, I think it was a hornbill working with these small, I think there was some kind of ferret. In this case, the hornbill wasn't calling to find prey for the ferrets, but it would be their lookout. So when danger came, the hornbill would call and the ferrets would scatter. I think they were ferrets or weasels, something like that. I think the ferrets are in the weasel family, so whatever, some kind of ferret weasel. So I can envision something working where this thing goes out, finds prey, and because it needs to feed on the soul once it's dead, right? There's it doesn't want to act right then, but it can bring other things that have learned to follow the call, and then and they work together. So I like it. And I'll read one more. Let's see. The Scorched Ones. Totally desiccated undead emerge from the sands, dried to the bone and covered with dust, ash, and salt crystals. These walking corpses inflict additional desiccation damage, a d4, and they have 1 extra hit die, but normal water damages them like holy water, and holy water inflicts double damage. That's another interesting encounter. And this one's kind of cool because in a desert, there's that, I don't even want to call it risk reward, but if you think about using water on them, that's great, and it will work well. Holy water obviously is a bonus, but you're in a desert, so if you're tracking water and you're tossing water on those skeletons or whatever, yeah, I guess they're skeletons or skeleton-ish, then you're going to run out. You potentially run out of water, and that puts you in jeopardy. So it gives you a nice way to deal with them in an efficient way. But the cost is, well, now you're using up these resources in a very resource-poor environment. So that is in the deserts. This is forests. Let's see, which one of these speaks to me? Let's try the Shrine of Dark Prophecies. A small temple in the woods, dark and gloomy. The old prophetess living here is willing to reveal some secrets about the future of the explorers or their mission. The heroes must bring a large black animal alive and let the prophetess slaughter it in bloody ritual. Then she can see and reveal the future, but only in its darker, bitter aspects. Roll the next encounter and give some hints to the group. So it seems like what they are... Okay, so just to unpack this slightly, and one of the problems, I'm not going to say a problem, but one of the consequences of these sorts of tables is there is a lot that they either have to explain very briefly or not explain at all. So it is really going to be incumbent on you, the GM, when you're rolling these up, to have the mind, it be in the mind, mental space, have the time and everything to address the things that they can't address because you can only fit so much in a small table. It almost makes sense that if I were going to use these, maybe roll them in advance. I think I've mentioned other videos, or other people have mentioned in the comments of the videos that, hey, something to help you save time, or if you're not heavy on the improv, or you just have enough stuff to keep track of the moment, roll stuff in advance. Stuff like this will very much benefit from it. This could have actually been a location, but it's an encounter. It is an encounter, right? It doesn't have to be a combat encounter. In this case, this is something that most likely the party, you will have to seed earlier on that this exists. Another reason to roll in advance, because either they'll have to go and the prophetess will have to tell them the thing that they need to bring back, or is it something that they would have maybe heard rumor of? Hey, if you bring a black animal to this cottage, this stuff can happen, but it kind of requires that part. So you either have to seed it in advance or be ready for, okay, the parties, they're going to have to visit them, go do something else, come back and visit them. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. And then of the ritual, what they're saying here is this future they're going to tell is really about the next encounter. So you would roll up, or if you had the next encounter already ready, what you assume they're going to run into, tell them about that. That's definitely one way to do it. Though that, to me, I don't know if I love that so much. Not that there's anything wrong with learning about your next encounter, but just in terms of it's not really giving you much of a future if it's going to be the next thing that you meet. And of course, just from a game playing perspective, if you are playing a very open-ended, sandboxy-ish game, there's a good chance that the next encounter you may have written up, they may never see, or they might approach in a way that then going to invalidate this future. I think that's what makes these sort of prophecies and the stuff about the future being revealed becomes difficult, because there's so much open ground. So I might try to figure out how can I hint at different things that is maybe more general, maybe more flexible in a way that could fit a lot of different situations, but still keeping that, going to focus on kind of the darker elements or the sort of the dark side of it. But of course, that's difficult to do. And how can you can't possibly explain all of that in a paragraph. So they just give you, hey, roll the next encounter and kind of give them some idea of what it is. And you can do that, but I might try to push further in the future. If you have a good feel for your party, you'll probably have a pretty good idea of where they're headed, and you can do more with that. If you don't, then it's going to be harder, and you can just use this encounter method. I'll read one more. The Frooms. Heroes have a chance to spot these creatures' tiny village of mud and roots from a distance before they rush screaming on them. Wow. Screaming. Frooms are demonic humanoids about 1 foot tall with the body of a flayed, blood-dripping gnome and 2 gold coins instead of eyes. They only have D4 hit points and are armed with small knives that do 1d3 damage. But their gold eyes have a 50% chance of absorbing all spells, and there are dozens of them. 6d10. So from 6 to 60. The best trick to save oneself is to throw some gold coins at them. They will start fighting over the gold and completely ignore other creatures. So, man, that is definitely a unique monster. I have not heard of Frooms before. I have not heard of anything like Frooms before, and they seem creepy as all get out. I kind of thought, like, oh, are they playing on Smurfs? And maybe they are in a sense, but they're just kind of nasty. I like the idea of that they have a 50% chance of absorbing all spells. That is will give them an even creepier factor if your magic user decides to launch that fireball at all of them, which is a good call because there's so many of them. But there's a 50% chance, and you have six, even just six of them. Chances are they're going to absorb the spell, so it's probably going to fail, which is going to then really put the fear into them. And I like the fact that you can throw gold at them and they'll fight over the gold, which is something that it was actually listed in the white books, 3 brown books, not the white, I guess, yeah, 3 brown books, not the white books, 3 brown books talked about how to escape from different creature types. For unintelligent creatures or animalistic type creatures, they tell you, hey, you can drop food and that will give you a chance to escape. And for intelligent creatures, it was basically drop loot. So in this case, gold as your loot, throw it at them, and you would hope that they go away. You think you might make a roll, maybe they'll just take the loot as a kind of a price and let you go. But in this case, it's just going to sow enough dissension in them for you to get away. Fluffy the Griffin says, I find many of these tables to be of inspirational use only. They're too complex to roll up mid-game. Yes, I would probably agree with that. These are ones I would say that, yes, so far, and there's no reason for me to think at this point that they're going to suddenly change, as they are definitely nice for inspiration. They give you a lot of great ideas, vivid imagery, strong imagery, lots of great, weird, strange, terrible, gross things, but that there isn't enough mechanics there and stuff to run them. So we're not getting any kind of stats. Sometimes they'll throw in, hey, how much damage they're doing. For stuff like those gnomes, right? We're playing an OSR. I was presuming we're playing an OSR game. We could just pick a gnome from the monster manual, or you could even just say, okay, they got 1 hit die and roll roll 1d6 their hit points, and you could kind of play fast and loose with them. They might be ones that you could kind of roll right away, but a lot of the other ones, kind of like I mentioned before, they do seem to require some setup. You probably want to seed them in your world somewhere. You probably need to develop some things about them, and yeah, they just don't have enough information. It's just the nature of these kinds of tables. So yeah, I would definitely say is my preferred use case for these is when you are looking for inspiration, you're game planning for your next session, you're looking at a hex and you kind of don't know what to put in there, or maybe you have the area part, the location kind of part in mind, but you don't know stuff that they might encounter inside there. You want something. These are really fun to use. But yeah, in the middle of the game, you may want something with a little bit more crunch that you can kind of just completely just use in the moment, because this does seem to take some prep and maybe some adjustments and that sort of thing. Okay, now we're at freshwaters. Yeah, I'll start at the end again. Number 9, Lady in the Water. A phantasmal shape of a woman flows downstream under the water. Those who see her suffering face must save versus spell or suffer a -2 penalty to all rolls for the day. The woman's remains are stuck in the mud 1d6 miles upstream, and if they are found and properly buried, the good soul will gain half the experience points required for the next level. So I really like that, but I would probably change it. And what I would change is, we have this great image of a shape of a woman flowing downstream under the water. Now, I think I would... So there are a couple things I would change. We have this really beautiful, vivid image. Ladies, illusion image floating downstream. The problem is it's floating downstream and her body is upstream. I don't know that it's intuitive for them to think, oh, it's upstream. And I just don't like, and the -2 penalty, yeah, it's nice, but man, I want that. That doesn't really, there's nothing thematic about there. That is really just kind of generic and dry. So what I would do is do something with if they fail to save, they're obsessed with finding the woman's body, right? And that's what you would think, that's the whole point of this illusion, is it's generated by her spirit to get people to save her. So what I would probably have is if they fail to save versus spell, they won't leave the river until they find the body. And they maybe they'll have some general sense where it is, or maybe not. Heck, they might even potentially drown themselves because they're trying to dig out from wherever this woman is, but they won't leave the river. And we can talk about what that might look like if the party tries to force them to leave the river until they find this woman's body. And we can even put a clock on it if we want to, that if they don't find it in so much time. That's what I would do with that. That to me is a lot more flavorful. It's a lot more actionable, and it kind of really turns it into more of a real set piece encounter than just, hey, you get -2 and then you can go along your way. Kind of force them to find it, but then there's that difficulty. You don't know where it is downstream. Maybe the character's trying to drown themselves trying to find it, so you have to deal with that. So it's not easy. And then maybe, you could roll on the table to see what they get when they get down there. And maybe one of the options on the table is getting a whole ton of experience, or you just have it that there's some good loot. We could get rid of that experience point thing and just put some decent loot in there that will, maybe depending on what level they encounter, it could be halfway to their next level. But again, it's a really great image. I would just want to tweak the encounter itself. That's for me, my game, my style. Someone else might think, oh yeah, that's great. And of course, like I said, that we're looking at one little paragraph in a table. You're gonna have to take that, right, and kind of build it out to suit. This is how I would build that one out to suit. Let's see. We'll go to a Monastery of the Living Mummies. In a dark, rocky island, there is a small monastery. The monks want to demonstrate the supremacy of mind over body and undergo a painful practice that lasts 3 years, during which they mummify themselves. Their flesh loses all liquids, and they writhe in agony until they place themselves in wooden crates and become real living dead. The other monks keep them in the basement of their convent, but their cries are heard a long distance around. So this is definitely a very enigmatic. This to me is more of a location than an encounter, because what's the encounter here? There isn't really one. It's presumably the party is somewhere they hear the cries of the mummified mummies. I'm curious why they cry. I actually have heard that there's something that either they still do or they did in the past. I want to say in Nepal or Tibet, where these monks would essentially mummify themselves while they were still alive, basically doing the kind of stuff to their bodies so that they were sort of embalming themselves, which is really interesting. But they weren't. I don't know if it's happened in living memory or if they're still doing it, but I don't think there was this concept of them crying and screaming about it. I think it was more contemplative. And so I would wonder, well, what's the hook of this place, right? So if we were to roll this up, it doesn't really work as an encounter. As Fluffy the Griffin said, you really would have to take this and really flesh out what's happening. This is more, to me, this one should have been in the areas book, but it is some really vivid imagery, and I could definitely see coming across a location. It seems like it would have to be some pretty wide rivers. So you have an island with, I'm guessing, a monastery of some size on the island to plunk this location. But it is a really interesting idea. We get into jungles. Waspanas. This is the first entry on the table. These dreadful carnivorous fish move in shoals in the region's waterways, but they can also fly out of water and cover 100 feet floating over the ground with their little wings. They are attracted by blood, and even superficial wounds, heroes with missing HP, in parentheses, may attract them. They can stay out of water for about 1 minute, time enough for the shoal to completely devour an explorer. Their attack is avoided, save versus breath, or suffer 2d12 damage. They return quickly to the water, and the potential victim has about 1 minute to leave the area. So this is definitely an encounter. So in this case, it's not so much a combat encounter as it's really a trap. Because you can essentially look at it as coming in the area or coming in this part, you're going to trigger them leaping, you're going to make a save, or you're going to take a bunch of damage. Presumably there's too much fish to be able to do much with. I mean, they are in the air long enough that I suppose you could argue someone could hit Fireball or some other area effect spell and hit a bunch of them, but I would say also presumably there's a lot more fish in the water. So it's really not something they're meant to fight. meant to either run through quickly or figure out some way to avoid. And they're not telling us how to avoid it, which I think is fine. I think a lot of times I don't need them to say, hey, you can avoid it by doing this, that, or not. And there are some clues in there. They're attracted by blood and superficial wounds. So maybe you could run into, and this is where, again, you need to set this up. If there's NPCs around or villages nearby, they might say, hey, take a bag of this cow's blood. And when you're going to pass through this area, toss the blood to the side, wait for it, and then go. So there's some information or rumors or something else you could use to sort of give the player some information they could potentially prepare for this a bit, or it could just be, hey, you're going to have to just race through here and hope for the best. I also might put like a 1 in 6 chance, which in a lot of OSR stuff and back in the original books, when you would hit traps, they wouldn't trigger 100% of the time. It was you roll like 1 or 2 and 6 and that would trigger. And that makes sense for this too, because it might be the fish aren't around. Maybe they've already fed from someone else that came by. It'd be really neat if they did. You could put, you could have in the description the fact that they see a boot or a pair of boots or something sitting in the middle of the path, and you're wondering like, what happened? What happened with these boots? That's what happened. So definitely some things to do there. Let's look at the Planar Hunter. This is number 7. A supernatural 8-hit die humanoid with extraordinary equipment and artifacts has just decided this jungle is the perfect place for some hunting. Its arsenal includes, but is not limited to, nets that paralyze, save versus paralysis, exploding darts, 3d6 fire damage, steel bolas that magically increase their weight on command, a cape of invisibility that only makes it visible for a few seconds when attacking. It enjoys playing cat and mouse and will try to separate multiple foes to fight them one by one. Fortunately, it is only interested in quote-unquote big game and powerful magic items and will ignore low-level characters. This is basically a fantasy predator. So that's cool. I could definitely see this kind of fun kind of encounter. It is absolutely Predator in fantasy form, and I, for one, am down with that. We go into the mountains and hills. Let's see. Number 3, the Orla. A transparent ooze prowls these mountains, an invisible monster with an unknown anatomy. The GM can use any ooze or slime, adding invisibility to it. This feature is not magical. The ooze is slightly transparent. Therefore, no form of magic will make it visible, but common sense might easily suggest ways to make it visible. The creature is very fast and always hungry. I don't know if the Orla is a reference to anything, but I can dig it. I mean, you might wonder if it's, presumably, there's dust and stuff would kind of give it some faint visibility, dirt in the air, but maybe it just any dust that hits it just gets consumed, so it stays transparent. Fluffy the Griffin says, this reminds me a bit of the 2nd edition AD&D deck of encounters. Yeah, I could definitely see some similarities there for sure. Let's see, number 7, the Hungry Hill. The rocky hill or outcrop the group is moving upon is actually a colossal mimic, unable to move. Characters must save versus death or fall inside its mouth and be chewed for 2d6 damage per round. They can try to pry its mouth open using strength or wound it. For each attack, there is a percentage chance of being spitted. I think it's just spit out, equal to the damage inflicted. There is a percentage chance of being spit out equal to the damage inflicted. Okay, so I'm assuming that means if you were to say roll a 6 on the dice, that you would have a 6% chance of being ejected out. Yeah, it's interesting. So I guess maybe you put its mouth as kind of the top of the hill, and then it would just sort of open and then close, kind of like a Venus flytrap in a sense. People love mimics, so they definitely have a mimic encounter. Plains. Now we're on to plains and valleys. Let's see, looking around here. Let's go to number 8, Abandoned Farm. Inside this abandoned farm, a string of dried ears can be found hanging from a wall, while hidden in jars and pots is an impressive collection of teeth. The rabid lunatic, a level 6 barbarian that keeps his trophies here, is only encountered 10% of the time, as he is busy increasing his collection and not so willing to meddle with a group of armed people. If his trophies are stolen, he will stalk the group and attack when they rest or are facing other enemies. So this one it's probably as much an area or location as an encounter, but it's definitely a neat one. I don't know if this is also based on some kind of fictional thing, but right, you go in and there's all kinds of gross trophies. It's only going to, the most likely that the keeper of said trophies are not going to be around, but if you take something, he's coming for you. So that's all right. It's very it's got a nice flavorful. This one though is one that you could easily drop somewhere, because you don't really, unless you roll that 10%, you don't even have to generate the barbarian, the quote unquote lunatic yet. You just have to describe the place. Let's see, trying to pick another one. Let's go with the moon rats. This is number 7. An endless swarm of rats emerge from under the bushes and tall grass. They quickly surround the group, and soon after, 2d6 were-rat bandits show up asking for their quote-unquote due toll. They'll simply ask for 10 gold pieces per person and some, quote, food to calm the small ones, unquote. If the group looks dangerous, if the group looks dangerous. Otherwise, they'll request all valuables. So this is definitely more of an encounter. An endless swarm of rats emerge from under bushes and tall grass. I mean, so there is one assumption here that the party is going to stop when those bunches of rats show up. I suppose if they were giant rats, they might. Otherwise, I guess it might change the nature of the encounter if they just have torches or something and they just decide to swipe their way through. I imagine the rats would give way to the torches. But that definitely is kind of a neat twist on your average bandit encounter. And it's also a nice one because it really feels, just from the name Moon Rats, you get a sense that this is a night encounter. This is not something that's going to happen in the middle of the day. But if your party's traveling at night, it's a nice way to put a twist on what kind of nocturnal obstacles or obstacles or just encounters you have. This is definitely a nice night encounter. You get to seas and islands. Let's see. Number 9, Triton Patrol. A squad of 5d6 Tritons riding giant seahorses approaches the group's ship. Their leader, a proud knight in seashell armor, politely but firmly asks for a tribute to the Sea King, 100 gold pieces per Voyager. Definitely an encounter. And this one is good in the sense that it's not that you shouldn't give your party a chance to avoid it, but it's a lot harder to avoid this one than it would be if there was another ship. Because when you have another ship approaching, if you're playing it fair, winds and whatnot, you could wonder, well, why can't they just kind of turn and flee this one ship? And that other ship puts the incumbent on them that other ship to outrun them. But if it's a Tritons riding seahorses, they can essentially move in any direction, presumably move faster than the ship. So if you kind of really needed an encounter, this is one and they can also be stealthy because they could presumably be underwater and then sort of pop up and be already around the ship. So a nice kind of ambush style encounter on the sea, but it doesn't have to be combat. It's not a kraken or something that's just going to be fight. They can pay the toll. And you could also work this in with getting more information, right? Maybe they could pay the toll and they could also ask some info. So it's a way of they could make some kind of trade of loot for information about whatever's up ahead or behind or anything else. And then let's see. Number 1, the oldest ship. A bizarre ship appears, crafted in a very exotic fashion. It seems to have been mended and repaired endless times, and to be now a mosaic of different parts, from all the seas and all the times. The crew is dressed in rags and also seems to come from every age and place. The crew is cursed by the sea gods for being the first people challenging the sea in the dawn of navigation. They can never disembark, and the ship is constantly repaired and the crew kept fed with offerings made by other seafarers. Denying something to the crew unleashes a curse. The captain or those who refuse to help is forced to embark on the ship forever. All sailors have a chance of having heard the legend of the ship and might recognize it. So another interesting encounter, not necessarily, or really it's not combat oriented much at all, since if they were, I suppose they would come up and they would need something and we can decide what that something might be. And then it's up to the party and their crew to determine whether they need they want to give it up. And if they don't, then the curse. I feel like there should be some way to get around the curse, because that's basically a campaign ender for any character who gets caught with a curse. I think there are those Pirates of the Caribbean movies that have some that get into some of these curses of the sea. So you might could play with those to figure out, well, what happens if half my party is now cursed. How can you get around it, or how can they solve it? But it's interesting. The one thing with this table is it seas and islands, right? So if you're on an island, some of these don't make sense. If you're on the sea, presumably some of these that might have been islands don't entirely make sense, but it is what it is. It seems like there's a lot of stuff that's ship-based, actually. Let's see. Not all of them, because that Rainbow Swarm looks like it's just on the air, so it could be over an island. Let's see. There was one that was no, wait, I just saw one. Boon from the Dead is one that presumably could float to shore. So just be aware that you might have to roll in this a couple times, or just choose one if you're on an island and you're not actually on the sea in a boat. Now we get to swamps and marshes. Let me see. What should I read here? Oh, here we go. Number 3, scarecrows. In this part of the bog, there are many poles stuck deep into the soil on which creepy black crows are perched, staring around to people walking in quote-unquote their place. Digging around the poles or plucking them out, one may find that they are attached at the bottom to a carved pumpkin, like underground upside-down scarecrows. If these objects are destroyed or damaged, 1d6 horrible undead crows will come out from the ground for each damaged pole. As soon as a good number of these diabolical creatures have gathered, they will attack the party. Let's see. Eric Henscom says, is this the same book as the one you read the other day, or is this a separate PDF? So I'll just reset this for folks who may have come in late. The product, it's one product, which is Lands of Legends Grim. On drive-thru, and again, I'm not sure if this is available in other spots, but at least from drive-thru, the product actually consists of 2 PDFs. The first one was the areas, which I covered in the other video, other stream, and this one is encounters. It seems like there's a fair amount of overlap just in terms of some of the stuff in the areas book. Seems like they're really almost as much encounters as areas, and I think there's definitely stuff here that's presented as an encounter, but it's kind of more a location. So you might have to mix and match them depending on what you're looking for. But they did split them up into 2 separate PDFs, but it is one product. That was Scarecrow. So that's interesting. So kind of an encounter, kind of a location. I do like the fact that you have these kind of inverted scarecrows that if you mess with them, then you summon a whole bunch of undead crows. It definitely makes for an interesting location in just thematically. If I was running some kind of horror location, I can imagine, say, if there was a ruined farms that you could see these kind of poles sticking up. It really seems like if you wanted to build kind of a location that was civilized, I want to say not civilized, settled, but has fallen into some kind of undead themed ruin, those scarecrows, inverted scarecrows, seem really cool. I suppose it is an encounter in the sense that there are these undead crows there, but to me, I look at it like that's really kind of a location, but still really interesting, and I like that one. Let's go down to Silent Death, number 4. A gray gas exhales from some pools of the marsh, remaining very low on the ground. The shortest explorers, parenthetically dwarves or halflings, may feel a sour taste in their mouth and an irritation in the nose and throat. The party stops the camp, ignoring these effects. Those who sit or lie down will fall asleep almost instantly and asphyxiate in 5 minutes without even waking up. Only a successful save versus death or noticing the immediate sleep of those who breathe the gas can prevent the silent death. So get it right. Is this an encounter or is it an area? I suppose it's kind of both. But it's a really cool image. I really like it in conjunction with the scarecrows. If I imagine something, if you think about, what was that Johnny Depp movie, the one where he's Sleepy Hollow? If you imagine that kind of really creepy Dutch settlement in sort of early colonial New York State, or not early, I guess it was already 19th century, but basically a colonial settlement New York State, up in the country. When night falls, the mists come up, right? And it was just all really creepy. And of course, the headless horseman's running around. I could see that kind of image of him coming into the town, and it's mostly deserted because people are sort of barricaded themselves in their homes, and that kind of sickly mist rising up from the ground. And maybe he sees those scarecrows and doesn't understand it. The locals understand it, and maybe they planted them there because worse things happened before they put them up, and somehow they figured that's what they needed to do. But as the party in that Ichabod Crane role of not being familiar with stuff has to come in and seize all the stuff. So it builds a great amount of just this imagery and tension. And of course, you could play up the fact that I would even say not even just dwarves and whatever, anybody can just kind of pick up on those odors. And it makes it incumbent on them to find shelter in these buildings, because if they try to shelter outdoors, they might just die. Terrence says, insert silent but deadly joke in there. Yes. It is the fart of death. Let's see, how many? So, okay, that's 2. So I've done 2 in Swamps and Marshes. So let's move on. I feel like I'm getting through this one faster than the other one. No, it's already been 42 minutes. So I guess not. Just time flies when I'm reading tables. All right, Wastelands. Number 2, the Wolf Children. According to legend, children abandoned by their parents on the edge of this land because they were deformed, weak, unwanted, or aka the kind of the Sparta method, become wolf children. The legend is true. Wolf children are ravenous, fast, and dangerous creatures, attacking in packs, but they can also be friendly if the heroes prove to be able to deal with them, sharing food and understanding their loneliness. They are undead creatures that behave like wolves. Oh, that's kind of sad. I kind of wished maybe that they wouldn't be undead, so I might change that one. Just gives them, to me, making them undead, I don't know if it makes it easier. And we have no stats, so who knows how powerful undead these are intended to be. But I feel like make them actual werewolves. Maybe they're werewolves who take them in. And at any given time, you have this big amount of these children werewolves that have been taken from the countryside. It could make for a definitely interesting, it is an encounter the way this is termed. It's definitely an encounter because you're somewhere in these where children show up, but they're also it has a very much a location element because they're talking about whatever land you're in. There's something that happens there, and there is you can call it adventure hooks or anything else. How do you feel about these kids? Are they kind of vermin that you feel like you need to destroy? Do you then feel like you need to stop this practice by stopping the werewolves who are turning these kids into wolf kids? Or is the blame on whatever culture society is dropping off these kids here? And do you go and have them deal with that? And there's a lot of stuff that's morally, there's a whole spectrum, right? It's definitely a morally sort of ambiguous encounter. You can think of it in many different ways. None of them are outright wrong, but there are going to be consequences in a bunch of different ways depending on how the party chooses. So I really like that one a lot. But like with a lot of this stuff, you will need to kind of set this up, think about it before you just drop it there. Or maybe when they're in the first parts of dealing with it, set it out further. But you'll probably want to figure out if you're just going to run these as undead creatures, or if you're going to do maybe what I would suggest, having them as more were creatures, or even some other thing. Maybe the werewolves who are doing this to them can't turn them all the way into werewolves, or maybe they turn them into something else. Or maybe they're not werewolves. There's some other kind of wolf folk that do this. So, but it's definitely cool. I like it. I like it a lot. All right, number 8. Who is the monster? Harrowing howls resound in the air. If the group seeks the source of the screams, they will discover that there are some werewolves bound and nailed to the trees. Yuck. An old man, looking insane, is torturing them with silver weapons for some past outrage and tearing up their intestines, nailing them to trees. He exploits the unnatural strength and regeneration of these monsters to indefinitely continue his tortures. Definitely an encounter. Man, you could just tie that in with the wolf children. I feel like those two, just put a line between those two and run them together in some way as different elements of the same thing. Really, I feel like, man, I've just already seen the seeds of an adventure in my head, which starts off with kind of this wolf children stuff, and then maybe also has this stuff with this other person, maybe someone from that village who's doing this, who kind of knows the truth that's going on, but how they're choosing to deal with it is just to punish those whatever werewolves or wolf creatures, or some of them. And maybe he doesn't even realize that maybe these are kids of the village, or maybe he does realize these are kids of the village, but he's just not right in the head. Very flavorful, could lead a lot of different ways. Did the party just put the werewolves out of their misery? Did they put the man out of his misery? Did they do both? Did they deal with it some other way? Still a whole kind of moral ambiguity over what's right, or what they should do, which I like. So good stuff. That's Wastelands, and that's the end. So we have, let's see, how many pages is that? I can't tell. Now, one thing they didn't do is there's no table of contents. I noticed. So I guess I feel like I can give my sort of final thoughts on the product. It's very well laid out. It's very well designed. I think it was, I forget, someone might have been, I think it was a comment on the other video. Someone said this would be good for first time or new GMs. I actually say that I wouldn't suggest this for new GMs, because for someone like me, I can open this book, come with this first thing, I can look at it, and in a minute, second, say, okay, we're rolling 1 through 10 on a table. I'm going to do these. And once I read a couple of them, I'll kind of understand what I need to do to make them work. I think for a new GM, especially if they're not even just new to whatever system they're running, but maybe new to these systems in general, I think I'd like something that has a little bit more explanation, is maybe gives up a little bit of the design for a little bit more of just precision in explaining how these things are meant to go together. Potentially, what are the rules you're supposed to use? Some products will give you more of an idea of, here is how we envision you using this product. This one doesn't. This one just says, here, take it and use it. For someone like me, fine, I can do that myself. I would think for a beginner, maybe they could use that bit of hand holding. Maybe they could use that bit of, well, how do you think I should use it? Because I'm sure that there's some way that these guys who created this, the authors, how they would use it in their games. So I would want to say, okay, how should I use this? And then as far as the content, it does take that prep. And if you're a beginner, you might not be used to that prep. You might not know what you need to prep. Very easy to get lost and kind of not come up with the things that you need. And then when you actually try to put this into place, you end up in a spot where you're not prepared for what you need. And it ends up almost being a hindrance to you, because you're trying to read this stuff. You're not quite sure how to read it. You're realizing it in the game that you don't have the thing that you need, that you didn't realize before, because you don't have the experience, right? So I would say definitely for the kind of intermediate and beyond GM, or at least someone who's comfortable, who's kind of figured out the things they need to, knows themselves, knows what they need to prep, kind of knows what to look for, knows how these tables tend to work, and has already their own framework for when they're going to use these tables and sort of what manner they're going to use them. I think this is a really good tool. I think there is a ton of really good inspiration in here. It's always with these things, with inspiration, I always wish, I wish there was a few more pages where they could flesh some of the stuff out, but that's not what they're trying to do here. They leave that to you. But even just reading this stuff, going through the process of reading it for this video, I've seen a lot of stuff that I could use, borrow elements of, flesh out in my own way for my own game. And, that's kind of what you want out of something. I mean, I would rather have something that's something like this, that maybe isn't as immediately actionable, but it's going to help me and give me ideas, than something that is eminently actionable, but I don't want to do any of the actions. And I definitely seen stuff like that, where like, this is great, and it tells you everything, you use it, and then I'm going through the stuff like, but I don't want to use any of it. None of it's interesting to me. For me, I'd much rather have this stuff. It is very interesting, but just keep in mind, the tables are all you're getting. It's not, there's no setup for them, right? There's only maybe there's the hints of mechanics in here. Sometimes maybe I would say, if I was going to say something maybe they can improve, is maybe be consistent with the mechanics they are putting in. Always put in the damage if they're going to say damage, or always give the hit dice if they're going to do that. Some stuff they decide to, some stuff they decide not to, some stuff they give really specific numbers. I'm just looking at this one. mountains and hills. They have Trollish Delight. Tells you about a stash of 747 gold pieces, which is a supremely specific number. I don't know. I haven't read the whole entry, so I'm not sure if that's a play on jumbo jets and 747s. I don't know, or something else. But that's a very specific number, and then other ones they won't. So I might say, hey, be consistent across the board. I think there are definitely things that I wish there was just a little bit more detail in there. But again, they once you've decided in a on your design and kind of what your product is, it does sort of set your parameters, and they do stick within their parameters. I like that it's split up in terrains, because I think that shows an understanding of if you're using these, if you were going to use these on a game or when you're prepping for your game, if you're doing a hex crawl, and all of these, right? None of these are encounters in a dungeon. They're all encounters out in the wilderness. So what is the main thing that you're going to have, which you might be looking at, is you're probably looking at your hex map. You probably have your terrain type, and you're looking for stuff for a terrain. So it's great that's laid out in the terrain. It seemed like, and I'd have to go back and look if they're in the same order. And it might be nice if there was a table of contents, even if it was that said, hey, here's where each thing is, which page each one is on. But the books are small enough, it's easy to flip through. But overall, I like it. I don't remember how much it costs. I suppose I should look at that, right? Because you would think cost, if it was $500, something like that, then you might say, wow, that's a lot for what you get. So it's $10 I'm looking at on drive-thru. I don't know if it's available in other places. I don't know. It doesn't look like, at least on drive-thru, it's only available in the PDF. So you will get, like I said, the 2 PDFs. They're labeled front and back. I think this one technically is back. That means the other one is front. I would say it would be nice if they rename those to areas and encounters rather than front and back, because that is what the titles of the book. The title of the book is Encounters. So I'm not sure why you wouldn't want to just call it Encounters. But that is Land of Legends Grim, thanks to Axian Spice. And for some reason, I kept saying Axian Space. Yesterday, it's Axian Spice. I think, I really think it's just because as a name, I don't know why, it just gives me Dune vibes. So I keep wanting to say Axian Space, just sci-fi coming out, but it's Axian Spice. I marked it down as promotional on YouTube. They did send me the PDFs for me to go over. Obviously, I did not promise them a review one way or another. Like I mentioned at the top of the other video, the way I always do this is I don't look at them until I come on the stream, and I really approach it as if, hey, we're hanging out at the local gaming store. And I don't know if everybody did this, but certainly me and my friends would do this, is we would go to the gaming store and just start checking out books, and you would just start flipping through and giving them a read, and maybe you would see something interesting and you would kind of call out your friends, say, hey man, take a look at this. This is cool, or this is not cool, or what's up with this, or this is awesome. So that's kind of how I approach it, just taking a look. And then, of course, I haven't played it. In this case, since it is very fluff-oriented and not a lot of crunch, I feel okay saying that I think I get the gist of it without having played it, as opposed to something that's very crunchy, or what I feel like. I always think that when you're reading stuff, you don't get the full. These materials are not for reading. It's not a book. It's not a book meant to read. It's a book meant to use for a game. In this case, because it's so much fluff and kind of prep oriented, I feel more confident than I might about a book that had a lot of crunch into it, where I might feel like I can give my perspective as far as reading it, but I can't give a full perspective because I haven't used it in the game. In this case, since it is so much about fluff rather than crunch, I definitely feel better with that. But this is something that I will definitely use. There's already stuff that's percolated in the back of my brain that will work for my game. I was supposed to play my game the other night, and it got canceled due to family stuff from one of the players. So I'm not sure when we're going to play next, but I was going to do that tomorrow maybe, or I meant to have one of these streams this week be talking about my home game and just sort of recapping and maybe doing some prep stuff on the stream. That didn't happen. So probably tomorrow, I think I'm going to, or the next stream, if you don't watch it or listen to it tomorrow, I think I'll go back to see what's going on in the OSR Reddit, which I think I might do on a weekly basis because I enjoy that. So tune in about the same time, same bat channel tomorrow if you're on the stream for that. As usual, if you like these, give me the thumbs up, subscribe, or whatever you do, and wherever you happen to be watching it. Helps me out a lot. I do have Patreon and Coffee pages if you want to help out in that way. This was Lands of Legends Grim. Just to wrap up, I dig it a lot. Lots of great inspiration, but just be aware that it will take some prep and work on your part as a GM to make it work. But there's a lot of good stuff in there. Anyhow, have a great rest of your day. Game on, and I'll talk to you later.